Over the last few months, I've read three different 600-page plus great attempts at the next modern novel, and I haven't liked any of them. These are Jonathan Franzen's Crossroads, Paul Murray's The Bee Sting, and Nathan Hill's Wellness. All of them I had significant issues with, and this is definitely a subjective thing, but it really, I think my opinion is about what I want to get out of a modern fiction novel. So I'm just going to go through each of the books, what I disliked about them, what I thought they were trying to attempt that didn't really jive with me. And again, I do have issues with these really sprawling novels that I don't think have a lot to say. I can forgive it in something like Solenoid or in Bolaño's 2666 because I think those are interesting and dynamic and vibrant. All of these were not for me, and I'm going to explain why, and hopefully open up again, as I always say, a larger discussion in the comments if you have read these and you've engaged with them and you like them or dislike them, what you sort of want to get out of these really large books which are trying to take on the modern world. And none of these really worked for me, so let's get into it. The book that I liked the most out of all of these was Jonathan Franzen's Crossroads, which takes place 50 years ago in a smaller town where a husband, Russ, is the pastor of a community. He has a frustrated housewife, Marion, and then they have three kids, including an older, more rebellious son who's off at college, a middle child who is sort of getting into a religious conversion, and then a precocious younger son. And we get every single one of their perspectives filling out this book, which is really trying to get, I guess, at the heart of America in the 60s and 70s, and even earlier, because we are also treated to backstories of these characters, particularly the housewife Marion. And that is an issue that I've had with a lot of these contemporary novels, is that they're very much focused on the past and history and how the characters got to where they are now, rather than what the characters are doing currently. Crossroads is very much a novel about older America meeting newer America. And I say newer because, again, this is stuck very much in the 1970s. And so you have Russ, who's sort of an old fashioned pastor, very much concerned with social justice. He is really in with the indigenous communities. He started a youth group, Crossroads, but it's been taken over by a younger pastor who's much more in tune with the youth these days and is more of a social and dynamic person, whereas Russ is a bit stuck in the mire. And then you have Marion, who's very much a frustrated housewife. And the first time where I really figured I would not like this book was when the complete momentum stops dead from all these different perspectives, and we spend like 100 pages with Marion's backstory of how she ended up with Russ, the issues of pregnancy in the 50s and 60s, and just sort of trying to rebel. She couldn't at that time. Now she's sort of starting to rebel now. And that rebellion is taken up by her children, her middle daughter, who is very much involved in this Crossroads new evangelical community, this more hip, but also a bit more strict and more personalized religion, which is very much in the conversation, as well as the son in college who is discovering his sexuality and sex in general, and as well as a different moral compass and his rebellion against his father. And then the youngest precocious son, Perry, who's just really full of himself and gets into drugs. And again, all of these things are themes that were taking place in 1970s America, but all of them, I think, are definitely things that were part of 1970s America and are much less interesting now. You have two different generations meeting, but for me, it's my grandparents' generation, my great grandparents' generation that are having the conversation. And these issues really don't feel like they're speaking to the contemporary presence. This book really feels like a book which is very much in conversation with the past. And I think I would contrast this with My Brilliant Friend, Elena Ferrante's masterpiece, which is about the past, about Italy sort of coming through the end of the 20th century and the rise of women's liberation and these things which are in this book, but that feels engaged with the present as you follow these people all the way through the future, and it very much feels like we are talking about how we got to our present day, whereas Franzen's book is very much how did we go from the 50s to the 70s, and we're missing so much more, and it just doesn't feel like a book which is speaking to contemporary issues. But for me, all of these characters, while it is interesting and well written, definitely just feels like I am reading something which is very much in the conversation with the older authors of the 20th centuries, like an Updike. And I'm like, I've already read Updike. I've read this sort of thing before. I don't find this tackling of the issues particularly interesting. It doesn't feel modern in any way. It's not a bad book, but for me, I was just frustrated that Franzen is using these opportunities to just go after decades that have already been analyzed to death, particularly his obsession with the past, a lot of his characters have very Freudian motivations. So, oh, because their parents were like this is how they behave and move forward. Like the eldest son's rebellion against Russ is very much like that. Marion's story is like this. It just does not feel like a contemporary book. All the psychology, all of the issues definitely feel in the past. And so for me, this was just very much a sprawling tribute to the past, obsessed with history and those backstories that we just take time out of the 50-year-old plot to even go further into the past, just stopped any momentum dead for me. And this just did not land for me. Franzen is a good writer. The characters are relatively okay, fleshed out. The women feel a bit hysterical, but all in all, just was not a book for me and just did not feel like a modern novel. The second book I want to talk about, Paul Murray's The Bee Sting, does a lot of the things that I wanted Franzen's book to do, but instead does them really badly. And in fact, I dislike this a lot more than I disliked Franzen's book. The book is about the secrets we keep. It follows a husband and wife in a small Irish town. They've got a teenage daughter and a sort of tween son. And the title comes from the fact that the wife got stung by a bee on her face on her wedding day and had her face hidden by a veil the whole wedding day. Or did she? We follow her and we follow into her past, and we also follow the secrets that the husband keeps, while also going to the perspective of the son and the daughter, and this, again, meandering 600-page book that is also obsessed with the past. Unlike Franzen, it is set in the present day, but like Franzen, we have these flashbacks which will stop the momentum dead immediately. Unlike Franzen, who at least seems engaged with his characters in the present day, the whole narrative tension of The Bee Sting is based on the revelation of what the characters did in the past, this peeling back of layers. So how did the husband get where he is now? What secrets did he hold? What was the wife's relationship like with her family and her father? What was she fleeing? And we find out the secrets of how even they ended up together, because the wife was first engaged to the husband's dead brother. So you just get this whole narrative that is based on peeling back the layers rather than someone engaged in the present. And of course, Murray does try to create these narrative hooks to the present where people will just randomly throw out warnings about climate change. There is a sort of flood which happens with unseasonal rains, but people will just talk about climate change rather than having it as an unspoken issue. It is just a thing where he will name it. And I found this other thing that he will handhold you through the entire process, because the revelations are all about the different perspectives which will slowly reveal the truth. Nothing is really left to ambiguity or perspective. You know, as you go through the book, that Murray is going to tell you the truth through another perspective of a new character, and that really just doesn't leave anything for you to hold mystery or hold tension, because it's all being explained through the past. But my biggest issue with this book was with the style. It almost feels like a parody of literary fiction. You're starting out following the teenage daughter's perspective, and it does feel like a rehashing. She is one of a duo of girls. The other one is much more popular and pretty, but she's intelligent. How can she figure out her life as a teen girl? Again, it's a bit recycled. Then we follow to the tween son, which I was beginning to get interested in. Then we switch to the mother, and all of a sudden we are in stream of consciousness with no punctuation. And it's trying to liven up this really stultified past-focused narrative, and I think it's trying to make the mother appear to be harried. She's really just trying to get through her life. She's confused, but reading her character, she's the one that's holding the family down. She's selling her possessions because the father's out of job, and reading her past, she is very much thinking things through. She's very intelligent and trying to move forward. When we get to the husband's perspective, he's very much not in control, has all of these secret lies, and is in a fugue state for a good portion of the book, but he's not in stream of consciousness. So it's this sort of style shift for no reason other than try to bump things up, and it doesn't even make sense narratively, that I found really, really frustrating, because he is doing a sort of modern literary thing, unlike Franzen, which is much more staid and just a more traditional novel, but he's doing it for no real reason, and it becomes nonsensical, especially as we move towards the end of the book, and all of a sudden we're almost in a screenplay where we have this very action-heavy plot which just has the character's name and then a semicolon describing their actions, and all of a sudden Murray is throwing even more perspectives from characters that we didn't even have before. But again, it's not for any really purpose other than for him to tie off loose ends that he's created, again, to remove any ambiguity and to introduce these characters to move towards this ending, which he has been telegraphing for ages. He's even introduced a character, Victor, whose whole purpose since he's introduced is to create this ending, and you can see it coming from a mile away. And I read on reviews of this that people who are less used to literary fiction were annoyed by this ending because it is purposely ambiguous and sudden. But for me, that makes it feel like a parody of literary fiction because you are waiting for this purposely ambiguous and sudden ending. I recently read Sally Rooney's Intermezzo, which has this bisected view of these two brothers. The older brother is also in more of a stream of consciousness, but again, he's high and he's frazzled, and it actually works as a contrast with the other brother. It's not just through there to try to liven up the book, it's there for a purpose. There is a cohesiveness to this. I was very frustrated by this book. Again, it's stuck in the past like Franzen, but it's trying to do everything to try to make it sort of new, but none of that is interesting because all of the revelation and the plot tension is stuck in the past. All of the style is just flash and no substance. And in the end, I was really, really frustrated and disappointed by this book. But the book that I had the most issues with was actually the most contemporary, and that's Nathan Hill's Wellness. And that follows a young couple. They met in the 90s in Chicago, and then we switch to the present day where they have over-leveraged themselves on a condo, and it goes through them trying to figure out their lives now as sort of middle class, upper middle class young urban professionals. They have a son who's like autistically coded, and it just goes into the problems of the present day, while also, just like Franzen, just like Murray, very much obsessed with the past and how they got here. Again, we have this very Freudian obsession with broken families and how familial abuse can lead you to be the way you are. And again, we have to know everything about the lives of our characters, how they ended up this way. And the parents of the husband just seem like parodies. There's a great crime that he continues to suffer for. And it just, again, feels very much stuck in 20th century psychology. And again, feels overstuffed where you just have all of this information, which isn't really in conversation with the present other than try to add depth, but it just ends up robbing momentum and just creating all of these cliches of how these characters are why they are because of a family secret and a family past. It just doesn't work. But for me, the worst sin of this book was it speaking to contemporary issues as just the most banal analysis and banal plotting of anything, where you have the wife is very much focused on raising her son right and is very much like watching all of these ways to optimize her life and her motherhood and talking to like a perfect mom in her neighborhood. She gets involved in maybe to save her relationship they should do swinging. And then the husband, whose father has been radicalized by Facebook conspiracy theories and is trying to improve his relationship by downloading a fitness tracker and getting involved with that. And you just have all of these conversations of the upper middle class about how they're trying to improve their lives, and they're high earners, but they're not quite rich yet. But all of the banalities of the 21st century don't make interesting reading, and all the issues that they're trying to overcome, it doesn't need a 600-page novel just to cycle through them analyzing and going over all of the little issues that they have with their current lives, the problems of technology, algorithms feeding into things. Because again, Hill doesn't trust his readers, much like Murray doesn't, much like Franzen probably does a bit better, but in this, Hill will just over-explain everything. Everyone has a very therapeutic way of talking about things, and they will analyze themselves. They will analyze their partner, and then Hill will come in and analyze again himself. It almost feels like a Dr. Phil episode where you're just diving into these very shallow issues without providing any extra insight that, yeah, the algorithms can be bad. Yeah, a lot of the contemporary world creates this problem of anomie and distraction, and you're trying to figure out something. But also, the larger theme of this book is the stories we tell about ourselves, because again, we're obsessed with this deep, dark Freudian secret in the past. And again, it just doesn't make anything interesting. There's nothing new or revelatory in this. It is just a catalog of the banalities of modern life, of people who are trying to find their purpose, but not in any interesting way. And Hill doesn't have anything interesting to say about it. The husband is a photography professor, and he's just really interested in these photographic abstractions, which of course relate to his hidden past. The wife is part of an NGO, which is just creating placebos, which again is not a really clever thing. And again, Hill this could be sort of an interesting parody if you've got like a Pynchon or someone who's actually good at this sort of stuff. But Hill will just emphasize over and over that, oh, they're creating placebos for the issues of the modern world because there's no way to do it. And just telling these stories about ourselves, telling these stories about ourselves, it just becomes uninteresting. And again, it's overstuffed. I will say that all three of these books did manage to avoid one of my great issues with modern fiction, which are these very passive protagonists, which are just sort of depressed and they sit there as the plot moves them along and they don't really react to things. Here you do have active protagonists, but again, it is all back facing. All of these books are very much character based books that are focused on your past and how you got to your current age. Franzen is only partway through his, so that's why I found his interesting. The other ones are very much so backwards facing that the contemporary parts just aren't enough of the concurrent basis. And so like something like 2666, which is very much engaged with modern issues, there is backstory stuff, but it is very much engaged with the present, feels much more contemporary, feels much more like a modern novel. As I said with some of the others, these feel like they're recycled from the 20th century. They're not doing anything particularly new and they're not doing anything particularly insightful. And all of them were very big disappointments for me. And hopefully, as I read further and some more really hyped books, they won't disappoint me as much. But let me know in the comments if you really liked these novels, if they really engaged you, because I'm always open to changing my opinion. As I said, these are very subjective opinions, but let me know what you think in the comments, and I will talk to you soon with hopefully something a bit more upbeat and not just books that I really disliked and I was very frustrated with because I had such high hopes. But to me, these just were not great modern novels. They were attempts at it, but none of them worked for me.